You won't believe what happens when Thandiwe, the girl who was forced to sit outside her own brother's wedding, rises from the ashes of her family's shame to become a queen in her own right. The world may have overlooked her, but she would prove them all wrong. Watch how she does it. In a small, dusty village of Malawi, there was a young girl named Thandiwe. She was born into the Mwale family, a family that once lived in big houses, wore fine clothes, and had the respect of everyone around. But those golden days had faded, and now the Mwales were just clinging to whatever pride they had left. Thandiwe was the second-born child, right after her brother Sifo. While Sifo was treated like a prince, Thandiwe was almost invisible in her own home. Every little thing Sifo did was praised. When he walked, when he spoke, even when he did nothing at all. He was the shining light of the family, the hope, the future. But Thandiwe, she was just there, unnoticed, unwanted. Her mother, Chipo, often made it clear where Thandiwe stood. "Girls are burdens," she would say without shame, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A son carries our name forward. A daughter only brings trouble and debt." Thandiwe grew up listening to those words, each one cutting deeper than the last. She would try her best to be helpful, to be kind, to make herself useful. She cleaned, she cooked, she obeyed every word without question. But it didn't matter. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how much she hoped, Thandiwe remained the forgotten shadow in her own family. When Sifo walked into a room, all eyes turned to him. When Thandiwe entered, it was like the air shifted, as if she had brought with her a heavy, unwanted silence. It wasn't just her mother who treated her that way. Her aunts, her uncles, even the village neighbors, they all followed the same silent rule. Sifo was the golden boy, and Thandiwe was the girl no one needed. Over time, Thandiwe learned not to expect anything. No smiles, no praises, no affection. She learned to live quietly, doing her chores with her head bowed, speaking only when spoken to. Inside her heart, she carried a small, quiet dream, a wish to be seen, to be loved, to matter. But in the Mwale family, dreams like hers were foolish. She kept that hope hidden deep inside her, holding onto it like a tiny flame in the middle of a cold, endless night. Even when it hurt, even when the loneliness became too heavy, Thandiwe never let that little flame die, because somehow, even in a world that wanted her invisible, she believed, maybe, just maybe, one day, someone would truly see her. Sifo, unlike Thandiwe, seemed to have the world wrapped around his finger. Luck followed him wherever he went. One sunny afternoon, everything changed when Tariro, the beautiful daughter of a rich and powerful businessman, noticed Sifo. It was like a dream. Tariro came from wealth beyond what the village had ever seen, and when she chose Sifo, it was as if the Mwale family had been handed a second chance at greatness. The entire village buzzed with excitement. Their wedding was being called the event of the year, a perfect union of old family prestige and new, shining money. People who once whispered about the Mwale family's downfall now sang their praises again. Chipo, who had once walked with slumped shoulders, was suddenly alive with pride. She became completely obsessed with how the family looked, how they dressed, how people would see them. To her, everything had to be perfect, spotless, grand. There was no space for mistakes. There was definitely no space for Thandiwe. Thandiwe, already invisible, was pushed even further into the shadows. She wasn't asked to help choose decorations or taste cakes. She wasn't fitted for a nice dress like the others. Instead, she was treated like a maid. Every day, she scrubbed the floors, washed mountains of dishes, and ran errands until her feet ached and her hands bled. All the while, she was reminded, again and again, that she wasn't a part of this celebration. She was just the help. "Stay out of sight," Chipo snapped one morning as the wedding day drew near. "We can't afford your face ruining the pictures." The words stung worse than any slap. Thandiwe lowered her eyes and nodded, swallowing the hurt, as she always had. But deep inside, something broke. It was no longer just about being invisible. It was about being erased. The message was loud and clear. She wasn't welcome, not even at her own brother's biggest moment. She wasn't good enough to be seen by the important guests or to stand with her family. As everyone else celebrated, laughed, and prepared for the grand day, Thandiwe worked quietly in the background, her heart heavy. She could hear the music playing, the guests arriving, the rich smell of food in the air. She watched from the cracks in the walls as her brother smiled proudly beside his bride, and she stood alone, unseen, forgotten once more, a silent witness to a life she was never allowed to have. But deep in her chest, that tiny flame of hope flickered. No matter how much they tried to hide her, no matter how hard they pushed her down, Thandiwe held onto a stubborn belief that someday, somehow, her time would come. As the wedding day drew closer, the Mwale household transformed into something out of a dream. White tents sprang up in the courtyard like magical flowers, their edges dancing in the breeze. Golden chairs gleamed in long, perfect rows, as if royalty were about to arrive. Lush fabrics from the city arrived in bundles, and the air became thick with the scent of roasted meats, fresh flowers, and rare spices that villagers could barely name. People bustled about with excitement, and the sound of music, laughter, and clinking dishes filled every corner of the compound. But while everyone celebrated, Thandiwe worked. She wasn't just helping, she was the engine behind everything running smoothly. With no proper shoes, she walked barefoot across the gravel paths, her feet swelling and blistered. She fetched heavy buckets of water, scrubbed stained floors, and dusted every corner of the vast family home until her back ached. The banners that waved proudly above the tents were sewn by her hands so tired and raw, the needle often pierced her skin. Drops of blood stained the cloth, but no one noticed. No one asked if she was okay. At night, while others feasted at the rehearsal dinners under fairy lights and laughed with full bellies, Thandiwe sat alone in the shadows. She ate leftover scraps in the kitchen, while listening to music meant for guests who never once asked about her. She was invisible, not just to strangers, but to her own family. One afternoon, as she carefully arranged a table of golden plates and folded napkins into perfect shapes, her aunt passed by and spat cruelly. "Know your place, girl." The words sliced through her already fragile heart, but Thandiwe didn't respond. She simply nodded, as she always did, and kept working. Her slippers were torn, her dress was faded, her hands were swollen, but she said nothing. Because girls like her, poor, forgotten, uninvited, had no voice. She watched as Tariro, the beautiful bride, walked through the compound in silk shoes, her hair glittering with beads, her smile wide and proud. Everyone bowed to her. Even Chippo beamed with pride, walking beside her as though she had birthed royalty. And Thandiwe, she disappeared behind the flower stands, hiding her face, hiding her pain. Nobody offered her a dress. Nobody saved her a seat. Nobody asked if she wanted to be part of the celebration. As day turned into night and the village glowed with lights, Thandiwe remained in the shadows, working, bleeding, and hoping. Her dreams, though buried deep beneath dust and silence, still flickered faintly. Somewhere in her heart, she whispered to herself, "Someday they will see me." But for now, she stayed quiet, because poor girls were meant to serve, not shine. The wedding day finally arrived like a grand storm, loud, colorful, and full of glory. Guests poured in from nearby villages and distant cities, dressed in glittering robes that shimmered under the sun. Gold chains swayed, beads clicked, and high-end perfumes filled the air. The sound of drums echoed like thunder, mixing with ululations and laughter, as the celebration kicked into full rhythm. It was the biggest event the village of Malawi had ever seen. Thandiwe stood quietly at the back of the compound, watching the spectacle unfold. She had no makeup, no jewelry, no shoes to match the occasion. She wore her only dress, a faded blue piece stitched at the sides where it had torn. It was once her mother's, long before poverty ate their pride. Thandiwe had washed it the night before with trembling hands, praying it would look just good enough to help her blend in. But nothing could hide the fact that she didn't belong. As she tried to step into the main wedding tent, excitement fluttering nervously in her chest, two security guards in dark suits stopped her. One looked her up and down, then smirked cruelly. "Family only," he said, blocking her path with a firm hand. "I am family," she whispered, her voice barely heard above the drums. But before the guard could respond, Chipo appeared, her face twisted with anger, her eyes darting around nervously, as if ashamed to be seen with Thandiwe. "Sit outside," she snapped. "You're lucky we even let you come at all." Thandiwe's heart sank. The rejection hit her harder than she expected, but she didn't cry. She simply turned around, swallowing the lump in her throat. Slowly, she walked past the glamorous guests, past the tents and golden chairs, past the laughter and luxury, and found a quiet corner outside. There, on the bare, dusty ground, she sat. The sun beat down mercilessly on her skin. Her back ached. The music from the tent thumped like a cruel reminder of the world she wasn't allowed to enter. She could hear the cheers when Tariro and Sifo danced in, could hear the clinking of champagne glasses, the toasts, the joy, all happening just a few feet away, yet so far from her reach. No one offered her a plate of food. No one brought her water. No one asked where she had gone. She was a shadow in her own family's joy. And as the party raged on inside, Thandiwe remained seated outside, dusty, forgotten, and heartbroken. But deep within her silence, something began to stir. A quiet flame, small but steady, the kind that doesn't burn right away, but waits for the right moment to rise. They had given her the seat of shame, but they didn't know. One day, it would become her throne. As the wedding carried on in full glory, with laughter echoing and glasses clinking, Thandiwe remained seated alone in the dust. Her body was still, but her ears picked up every word that drifted from the tent. Guests were beginning to notice her. Murmurs turned into curious stares. Whispers floated in the air like mosquitoes, small but painful. "Who's that girl sitting outside?" one woman asked, fanning herself as she nibbled on a samosa. "She looks a lot like Sifo, but she's dressed like a house girl," another replied, chuckling softly. "Maybe she's the maid," someone said. And just like that, laughter followed. Quiet, sneaky laughter, the kind that stings more than shouting ever could. Each whisper was like a blade slicing through Thandiwe's already bruised heart. She didn't need to see their faces to know they were talking about her. She could feel it, the judgment, the mockery, the shame wrapping around her like a tight rope. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her she hadn't eaten since morning. The sweet smell of fried meats and rich jollof rice filled the air, teasing her senses. Plates of food moved from hand to hand inside the tent, but not a single one came her way. Her throat felt dry like cracked earth, but no one offered her a sip of water. Still, she did not leave. She didn't beg. She didn't cry out. She didn't run away. Because something inside her, something deeper than pride, told her to stay, to endure, to hold her head high even when the world pushed it down. It was a strength she didn't even know she had. The kind of strength that grows in silence. The kind that is born from pain. As the shadows lengthened and the sun dipped lower, Thandiwe reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. It was old and slightly worn, but to her, it was priceless. Her late grandmother had given it to her before she passed. A woman who once whispered in her ear, "You are not less. You are hidden light." Thandiwe clutched the locket tightly against her chest and closed her eyes. Her lips moved gently, barely a sound escaping, but her words were full of fire. "One day," she whispered, "they'll regret this." She wasn't just talking about that day. She was speaking into her future, into the years that lay ahead, into the storms she would face and the victories that would rise from her tears. They saw a poor girl in a faded dress, but they didn't see the flame behind her silence. They didn't see the woman she was becoming. They didn't know. The whispers that mocked her today would one day speak her name with awe. And so she stayed, quiet, unmoved, unbroken, waiting. As the last rays of the sun painted the sky in soft orange and gold, the sound of an unfamiliar engine turned a few heads. A sleek black car, shiny and spotless, slowly rolled to a stop near the Mwale compound. The villagers stared. It was not the kind of car that visited dusty places like theirs. From the back seat, a tall woman stepped out, moving like royalty. She wore a flowing robe of sapphire silk that shimmered under the fading sunlight, and her heels clicked gently on the stones beneath her. Miss Zanale. Even those who didn't know her face recognized the name. Whispers began immediately. "Isn't that the woman who built that school in Lilongwe? I heard she sends girls abroad to study. A billionaire, they say." She was powerful, she was respected, and she was nothing like anyone the village had ever known. As eyes followed her, expecting her to head straight into the main wedding tent, she did something unexpected. She stopped and turned. There, sitting alone under a small tree near the fence, was Thandiwe. Dust clung to her dress. Her arms hugged her knees. Her eyes were lowered, but they held the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. Mrs. Anle didn't hesitate. She walked straight to her. The air shifted. People stopped chewing, stopped talking, watching, wondering. Mrs. Anle knelt slightly and extended her hand. "Child," she said gently, her voice calm like a song. "Why are you out here?" Thandiwe looked up, startled. No one had asked her that. Not her mother, not her brother, not even a passing stranger. And this woman, glowing like a queen, wanted to know. She opened her mouth. Nothing came at first. Then, slowly, the truth came tumbling out. Her voice cracked, her words shook, but she didn't stop. She told her everything, about being the invisible daughter, about being shut out, made small, treated like she didn't belong. She spoke of the wedding, of how her hands bled while decorating the venue, only to be pushed aside like dirt, of how she sat in the heat, hungry, thirsty, humiliated, because her presence was seen as a stain on her family's pride. Mrs. Zanele listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't frown, didn't flinch. She simply listened, eyes locked with Thandiwe's, as if every word mattered, and to her it did, every single word. When Thandiwe finally finished, tears clinging to her lashes, Mrs. Zanele placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "You were never invisible. They just refused to see your light." And in that moment, something shifted in Thandiwe's world. A crack of hope, a breath of dignity. She wasn't just a poor girl sitting outside a wedding. She had been seen, heard, and something deep inside told her everything was about to change. Ms. Zanele's eyes burned with anger as she stood up from Thandiwe's side. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for an invitation. With fire in her steps, she marched straight into the golden tent. The drums stopped mid-beat. The singers fell silent. Conversations died in the air. Every head turned toward the entrance as she walked in like a storm. Chipo's smile faded the moment she saw her. Sifo's drink paused halfway to his lips. Even the bride, Tariro, looked confused. Then Ms. Zanele spoke, not with a whisper, but with the voice of thunder. "Is this how you treat your own blood?" she demanded, her voice shaking the tent walls. Gasps echoed. Some guests looked away in shame. Others leaned closer to hear every word. Chipo tried to speak, her words stumbling over each other. I didn't mean, we were just..." But Zanele raised a hand and cut her off. "Save your excuses. I saw it with my own eyes." She turned to Sifo. "You, the big man of the day, watched your sister sit outside in the dust while you danced in gold, and you said nothing." Sifo's face drained of color. His lips trembled, but no words came. Then, calmly but powerfully, Mrs. Zanele reached into her silk bag and pulled out a thick, elegant folder. She held it up for everyone to see. "This," she said, "is a full scholarship for Thandiwe." The tent fell silent again. You could hear hearts pounding. She has been chosen to study at one of the finest universities in South Africa. Tuition, housing, books, travel, everything paid. Because unlike some of you, I saw her value. Whispers turned into gasps, then applause, then cheers. One by one, people stood, clapping, nodding, even wiping tears. But the loudest noise wasn't for the bride or the groom. It was for Thandiwe, the girl they left outside. Ms. Zanele looked at Chipo and said coldly, "You threw away your diamond, but the world will see her shine." Chipo couldn't speak. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes filled with regret, but it was too late. Ms. Zanele turned, walked out of the tent, and extended her hand once more, this time in front of everyone. And Thandiwe, still in her faded dress, stood up proudly and took it. The crowd parted as they walked past. Heads bowed. Some even clapped for her again. For the first time in her life, Thandiwe didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. She felt powerful. And as the sun set behind them, she walked away from the shame, straight into a future waiting to celebrate her. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Thandiwe sat quietly inside Miss Zanele's luxurious car. The cool leather seats felt like another world compared to the dusty ground she had just left. The engine purred gently as they drove away, leaving behind the village that had never seen her value. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being told to stay out of sight. She wasn't being hidden. She was being carried forward towards something bigger. Back at the wedding, chaos erupted. The celebration had turned sour. Guests no longer smiled. They whispered in corners, shaking their heads at the Mwale family's cruelty. How could they treat their own child like that? Someone asked. No wonder the billionaire walked out, another replied. The mood had changed completely. What was supposed to be the biggest event of the year became the biggest shame. Tariro's father, a man of wealth and pride, stood up in fury. He made a call on the spot, cancelling every promised business deal with Sifo's family. "I can't trust people who don't respect their own," he said loudly, for all to hear. The sponsors who had promised to invest in Chipo's small shop slowly backed out too. No one wanted to be associated with a family that treated their daughter like trash. The Mwale name, once respected, began to fall apart, piece by piece. But far from all that noise, Thandiwe watched the world rush by through the car window. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she simply breathed. For the first time, it didn't hurt to exist. The next day, she boarded a plane for the first time in her life. Johannesburg welcomed her with lights and movement, tall buildings that touched the clouds, and people who didn't know her past. Everything felt new, yet safe. She stepped into a beautiful campus filled with books, ideas, and opportunities. The library alone looked bigger than her whole village. She was given a clean room, fresh clothes, and warm food. But more than that, she was given a chance, a real one. She didn't have to beg for love. She didn't have to fight to be seen, all because someone, one stranger, had chosen to listen and believe in her. As she walked through the university gates with her backpack and dreams, Thandiwe whispered softly to herself, "I was never the problem. They just refused to see me." And in that quiet moment, everything changed. The girl they tried to hide was now shining brighter than they ever imagined. Years rolled by like a fast river. Thandiwe didn't just survive, she rose. She studied hard, pushing through every challenge that came her way. In a few years, she graduated as a doctor, standing tall and proud in her flowing black robe. Cameras flashed and people cheered her name. But Thandiwe didn't stop there. She went on to become a speaker, standing before crowds of thousands, telling her story, not to shame anyone, but to inspire those who thought they were too small to dream. Books with her name on the cover lined the shelves of famous bookstores. People read about the girl who once sat in the dust and now walked red carpets. Her voice echoed in grand halls much larger than the tiny streets of the village she once called home. She could have forgotten about where she came from. She could have turned her back completely, but instead, she chose to quietly give back. She sent money to the village, building wells, sending children to school, making sure no little girl ever had to feel as forgotten as she once did. But she never signed her name. She didn't do it for praise. She did it because she understood what it meant to be left behind. Then one morning, years after she had left, a letter arrived. It was simple, written with shaky hands. It said, "Please come back, we're sorry." At the bottom, there were two signatures, Chipo and Sifo, the same people who had once told her to stay out of sight, the same people who had thrown her into the shadows on the happiest day of their lives. Thandiwe read the letter carefully. Then she placed it gently on her desk and smiled. It wasn't a smile of anger or revenge. It was a smile of peace. She had already moved far beyond their cruelty. She had built a life so big and so bright that their apology, though late, no longer held power over her. Some wounds, she knew, healed with time. Others never truly closed, but instead turned into armor, strong, shining armor that no cruelty could ever break again. Without a second thought, Thandiwe folded the letter and placed it into a drawer. She didn't need to go back to prove anything. She had already won, simply by becoming everything they once thought she could never be. Her story wasn't about revenge. It was about rising from ashes to crown. Years passed, and Thandiwe's life became a fairy tale in its own right. This time, it wasn't her brother Sifo's wedding that everyone was buzzing about. No, this time, the cameras were flashing for her. Thandiwe, the girl who once sat outside, was now the center of attention. The grand venue was filled with laughter and music, and reporters rushed to get their interviews with the new queen of the day. In the front row, Ms. Zanele, who had believed in her when no one else did, sat with pride, beaming at the transformation. The world watched in awe as the woman who had once been overlooked, shunned, and rejected was now the one everyone admired. As the event carried on, a reporter asked her a question that everyone was dying to know the answer to. "What about your family? How do you feel about them now?" Thandiwe smiled, a calm, confident smile that spoke volumes. "Sometimes, being cast out is the best thing that can happen to you," she said, her voice steady. The crowd fell silent, and then the whispers started. People realized the weight of her words. Thandiwe wasn't bitter or angry. She was wise. She had learned that being rejected wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something even bigger. Her family's mistreatment had pushed her to rise higher, to build her own path, to carve out a future that no one could take from her. Thandiwe wasn't begging for a seat at the table anymore. She had built her own table, a massive one, where she could invite anyone she chose. She had created her own kingdom, and now she ruled it with grace and power. The wedding was more than just a celebration of love. It was the sweetest revenge, not because she had sought to hurt anyone, but because she had become everything they never thought she could be. From the girl in faded clothes, left to sit outside, she had become a queen who stood tall, surrounded by her accomplishments. And so, Thandiwe didn't need to answer to her past anymore. She had risen far beyond it. Her life was proof that even in the darkest moments, the light of your own strength could shine brighter than anything the world tried to throw at you. Wow, what an incredible journey Thandiwe has had. From being cast aside and treated as invisible, to rising above it all and building her own kingdom. Her story is a powerful reminder that no matter how much the world tries to put us down, we have the strength to rise. Thandiwe didn't wait for others to change their minds about her. She believed in herself, and in doing so, she transformed her life, proving that sometimes the most painful moments can lead to the greatest victories. If Thandiwe's story touched your heart, then don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs a little reminder of their own strength. Life might not always be fair, but we can always choose to rise above and create a life that truly shines. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got so many more heartwarming stories waiting to inspire you. Your support means the world to us. Thank you so much for watching and being part of this journey. Keep believing in your own power, just like Thandiwe did. Stay strong and keep shining.